Welcome back to the session 25. And in this session, as promised, I will talk about the changes over the time for the Chinese naming systems. Of course, there was always this Chinese elite system for art, for just about everything, right? And then there's, for the Chinese mass, the illiterate. So we have to differentiate the two. They were never the same, but what I'm about to talk about is the Chinese elite naming system. In the old days, all the Chinese, you would have a given name, and this name pretty much, probably 500 years before you were born, was already decided by your ancestors, because they have a, you can call it coding system, which is naming system, right? So that given name, by looking at that name immediately, the people of the same family, coming from the same family tree, they would know the number, what generation you are at. Let's say the 12th, the 13th, the 14th, whatever. By looking at the given name, immediately they know. One, you are traced back to which branch of the family tree. And two, you are at what particular generation. So people can immediately identify you as someone from the same family tree, of a certain branch, so the blood relationship is clearly identified. So that was a coding system, used as a naming system. But the given name, you barely ever actually use it. Why is that? Because the given name is or was a very big deal. The people who can, address you by your given name, they must have some kind of seniority over you, either by ranking or seniority by age, because otherwise it was considered extremely rude to call by the given name. You don't do that, okay? If it is your boss, say, very high-ranking official, or is it some really older, let's say the senior citizen, appeared in your life occasionally, they were allowed to address you by your given name, but that's pretty much it. Of course, your parents, they were allowed to, but that's it, okay? If any younger, or the social standing, or the royal court ranking, people lower than you, and you have the seniority over them, you would be so mad if they address you by your given name. So the given name for the old school Chinese, at least for the Chinese elites, were not used. Of course, the mass Chinese, the illiterate, a lot of them didn't even have a, formal, or the British way call it a proper name. They may or may not, all their life. But this was the proper given name for Chinese elite, right? Which came out of a coding system. It's kind of a rotary too. Basically, the given name always consists of two Chinese characters, and we all know a little bit about the math. So basically, when the first Chinese character rotate and came to the end of the cycle, then the second started, rotate. And then the combination, of course, that can go for many generations. I don't have to tell you the mathematical, possibility. You know it, right? With the two, starting to, this one goes around and stops, and then that one never moved, just stayed. And then when this stopped, this one started rotating, and then this again. So basically, there are a lot of combinations I mean, how many generations of a household you calculate, so in any case, that was the given name. So, and we understand that old Chinese elite, they only allow the people in seniority to address them by their given name. But then after given name, what else did the Chinese elites have? So for the male, you became adult at age 20. For female, that was 15. So when you are at, basically celebrating your birthday of, the 20th birthday for boys or men, young men, and, the 15th birthday for girls, that's the time you are giving a middle name, okay? And this middle name is not a coding system. It does not identify, your family tree branch and a particular generation you're at. This actually is a name to indicate the hope of your parents, what you're gonna grow into and turn out to be. So the party who was often invited to give that name typically was someone enjoys some very high standing, either academically or at least, had the impeccable integrity. In other words, well respected. You would always invite some, and normally it's a senior citizen, okay, with the seniority in many different ways. And this would be the person invited to give the middle name to the typically more young men than the young girls. So, at a lot of more, I guess, opening Chinese elites, they do the same. They did the same for their daughters as well. In any case, so this is more literary names. Whereas the given name is just a code. Code name or whatever. Today, if you're in the IT business, that's identify mark. So in any case, this one, the middle name, after the 20th birthday, you become a young man, or the 15th birthday, you become a young lady. The young lady, back then implies that you become eligible to marry to someone. But for a young man, when you turn 20, you are officially responsible for a lot of things. Of course, the filial piety was the core of the Confucianism. So now you have even more responsibility to, towards your parents, your grandparents, and all that. Of course, career is also very important. You need to, if you're, the descendant of Chinese elites, you're supposed to keep on, pursuing your royal court political career by, passing through the 3 levels of the exams. So that is was the given name of, the middle name of the Chinese elites. And then, let's say either you already passed the exam, or before you pass the exam, but you did a lot of this poetry, ink brush painting, calligraphy, and you pretty much got marinated, let's use that word, marinated by this, the Chinese elite culture, and you start to feel like someone, right? So you want to have your self, identification that you give yourself, not the code name, given from the book, several probably centuries before you were born, not given by the I guess dignitary invited to give you this middle name. But now you want something that is more reflecting your own character, right? To be a name that truly reflect yourself. So now you have the third name, and that is pretty much the one all your I guess friends, acquaintances, the social occasions would refer you to. Basically, the name you give yourself. And this name, a lot of it had a lot to do with the house that you live in. Because before you name yourself for that, you will, and that name, I would call it pen name, pen, later, or at least in the West, people use pen, but of course in China, people used, back then used Inkrush, but I call it pen name, because pen name, it was more appropriately reflecting one's, I guess, philosophical thought. Back then, all the Chinese elites, they named their houses, okay, whether that's the secondary residence, if they could afford one, or the primary residence, they named their residences. And then all the writings over their lifetime eventually archived, of course, collected and archived under the name of the residence that they gave name to. Let's say I don't have secondary residence now. I don't need. So what I have is a house and a very small house, humble small house, but I have a garden that I designed and built myself. So I named my residence, the only residence, not primary, not secondary, but the only residence, I named mine as Xiu Hu Tang. So what that means the direct and literary translation would be the Hall of Lake Houston, because that's where I am, right on the east bank of Lake Houston. So I named my house, along with the garden I built, designed and built, as Xiu Hu Tang, the hall of the lake house. So if I was a Chinese elite in old, traditional sense of the old Chinese society, all my writings will be archived, under this name. So when people see Xiu Hu Tang, they all should know this was the writing contributed by Wei Li, because that's the name I gave my own place. Could I change that? Yes, people did from time to time, because philosophically you arrive at something different, and then you no longer consider that name appropriate. So, and of course, back then it was a little cheaper to acquire a piece of land, and so you have the piece of land and you develop something. It may not be macho, but it became some kind of a dedicated secondary residence where you put all the books you collected, and hopefully if you're lucky enough, you probably have some antiques and you put there too. And that's where you enjoy your tea, you practice your calligraphy, your arts, and you social with the worthy friends. And we're not talking about rich people. We're talking about the people actually very knowledgeable and well respected for their multiple talents in calligraphy, in paintings, in poetry, and very knowledgeable because they read a lot and they traveled extensively, right? So those are the kind of guests. So back then, what's to brag about? It's not about how much money or what you own materially. It's who do you social with, the old school Chinese used to brag about, all I have is basically an empty small, humble house, but look at the guests visit me. I social with them. So our conversations were always stimulating conversations. And what do we talk about? Had nothing to do with money or, fame. So that was what it was all about. So when you give yourself the pen name or you give the name to your residents, it was all on the philosophical level. Basically, you're with that name of your own residence or name, your pen name. People look at it like, oh wow, I'm now curious, and this is of course intellectual curiosity. I'm curious about this guy and his place. If it's named like this, there gotta be some good stuff there. I'd like to meet with this guy for some good discussions or some really interesting stuff. That was the whole thing. So the name of the residence, they did change from time to time. And the pen names, one gentleman could have that kind of pen names repeatedly changing, to go with several. And each one would reflect a certain period of, lifetime of the gentleman. So under one pen name, he probably contributed with a lot of paper or poetry, or the calligraphy or ink brush painting. And then under the different pen name, you start to see the whole change. It may not be artistic style change, but you would see the next level of philosophical thought development. So now we know, right? So we have the given name or the code name indicating the family tree, where you came from and where you are at, the specific generation of that family branch. And that is called Ming, okay? And then the name the invited dignitary, gave to you, that was the middle name in Chinese called 字, 名字, okay? That's the second name. And then you get yourself the pen name, and that's called 号. So 名字号, and then plus the family name, right? So your parents, your grandparents, all the way up. I mean, your grandpa, your father, and your grandfather, trace back. That's your family name. So back then, you would have, as a Chinese elite or Chinese gentleman, you would have at least 4 names, and the one that stayed most active in your life or throughout your life would be your pen name, Hao. That's how people refer to each other. By protocol. It was extremely rude if you call somebody by their given name or even their middle name. Among the fellow Chinese elites, basically you all refer to each other by their pen names or hao. Even in the time before the Red Republic established, the top communist leader Mao and the back then the ruling party head Chiang Kai-shek, between two of them, they refer to each other by their pen name, Hao. Instead of calling Mao Zedong, Chiang Kai-shek referred to him as Runzhi. Runzhi was the pen name Mao gave himself. And of course, vice versa. Why? That was the protocol. Of course, today, you ask most of the Chinese, they probably don't even know. They have no idea what you're talking about. But that was the sophisticated Chinese naming system. And even the naming system is gone. So now, how appropriate when you, study Taoism about all this name, 名可名 非常名. Well, even the naming system is gone. You forget about the name. So pretty much today, when you look at the names, okay, you pretty much could tell the generation or subtly suggesting the age. The Taiwanese women, if their name is like something Mei, something Shu Hui, or you could tell that they must be older than I am. Okay, and then if you look at the Chinese name, mainland Chinese name, some what's the name, Jianguo or Wei Dong, they must be either somewhere around my age. That was just basically why, because they lost the naming system and they went randomly, so they became the popular name of the time. And then in Hong Kong, of course, it was the British colony for a while. It's also interesting. It's not about their Chinese name. It is about the English name they give themselves. So if you see their English name like a Tom, Jack, they must be really old, much older than I am. But the younger Hong Kong residents, they gave themselves the name, supposedly English name, but you barely see among the English-speaking people. A young boy would call himself Valentino, and he thinks that's English name, and that's cool, right? So when you look at the naming system of all this, places, all these three supposedly somehow, whether they recognize or not, somehow came from the traditional Chinese civilization, and evolved from there, and somehow went into westernization or modernization, and ended up with a different naming system. So that's about the names for the Chinese, the Taiwanese, and Hong Kong residents. So we'll wrap up here for this session. Until next one, ciao.